Welcome back. We're going to continue studying joints. The third type of joint is a synovial joint, where the bones are separated by a cavity filled with synovial fluid. So fibrous and cartilaginous had an actual material between the bones. Here we have a cavity that's filled with fluid. So here you can see a very, very simple synovial joint. These are diarthrotic, so they are freely movable, and there are 6 different types of synovial joints. You've got plane, which are also known as gliding joints, hinge joints, pivot, condylar, saddle, and ball and socket. So, if we think about what's going to happen now, 2 parietal bones are being held together by fibrous connective tissue. We don't need the parietal bones to move. So just really short little pieces of connective tissue will be totally sufficient to hold those 2 bones together. But when we get into joints that are going to move, things monumentally increase in complexity, because now we want 2 bones to be able to function and move, and as soon as you begin to move, you begin to lose stability. So at the very least, things that you're going to see in a synovial joint are going to be your articular cartilages, so we have learned where those come from. Your capsule is going to consist internally of the synovial membrane that's going to secrete synovial fluid into the cavity. And then the fibrous capsule that's kind of going to run along the outer portion of this. You're going to have ligaments that run from one bone to the next. And you're going to have a blood and a nerve supply in here as well. So this is a phalange joint. It's super simple. So, on the really simplest side, you got to have all of this. Okay. As we gain complexity, we're going to start seeing fat pads where we take adipose tissue and kind of shove it in between things. Meniscus, we'll see those in the knee. Those are fibrocartilage. Bursa and tendon sheaths you can see here. So basically a bursa is like a fluid-filled, synovial fluid-filled pillow that we're going to put wherever we want to kind of cushion and decrease friction. And then a tendon sheath is like a bursa that's been wrapped around a tendon, again, where we want to make sure that there's not wear and tear on these connective tissue pieces, because we know that tendons aren't really going to heal all that well. So we wrap them in some protection so that when you're bending your fingers, it's not scraping across the bones and things like that. So as soon as we begin to move, we start to see dramatic increases in the complexity of the joints. So what stabilizes them then? The first stabilizing factor is the articulating surfaces. In something like the elbow, these work beautifully. They look like puzzle pieces. Here is the trochlea on the humerus. This is the trochlear notch on the ulna, and they fit together really nicely. So in this case, we're going to gain stabilization from the fact that the 2 bones fit together well. And then here comes the knee. So if you look at the distal end of the femur, it looks like this. And then you look at the proximal end of the tibia, it looks like this. Those 2 do not fit together very well. Hence, the knee is not going to be stabilized very well by the actual bone structure. We're going to have to add in a whole bunch of stuff to try to hold these 2 bones together because their articular surfaces don't line up very well. So the articulating surfaces can help us or they can hurt us. All joints need ligaments. Ligaments run from one bone to the other. So they play a huge role in stabilizing the joints. But the most important stabilizing factor, and by far most important, is muscle tone. The skeletal muscles cross joints. And so the portion of the muscles and down into the tendons that cross the joints are going to apply tension on the joints, and they're going to stabilize. It's basically like having more sets of ligaments or this very structured tissue that runs across the joint. The stronger your muscles are that cross the joint, the stronger the joint is. The stronger it is, the more stable it is. If you've ever had like a knee injury or something like that, they don't say, let's say you have knee surgery. They've got you up and walking that day. And you're in the gym. And what are you doing? You're strengthening your quads, your hamstrings. You are going through and, really making sure that all the muscles that cross the knee have strength in them. That's how you gain stability in a joint. So by far, muscle tone is most important. Ligaments are really important. That's why when you begin to tear ligaments and things like that, we have problems with our joints. And then the articulating surfaces just really kind of depends on which joint you're looking at, whether or not this is going to be a positive or a negative for us. All right, the 6 different types of synovial joints. We are going to come across all of these as we go through. Ball and socket, pretty self-explanatory. Shoulder and hip, going to be those. Lots of hinge joints in the appendicular skeleton. Your carpals and tarsals have plane or gliding joints where all of the little short bones fit together. Condylar is kind of an egg-like shape into a very shallow depression on the neighboring bone. Saddle joint, so you see how this U is going in this direction and this U is going in this direction? This means that this bone could move this way and this one could move this way. So you get what's called biaxial movement. So the only place you're going to find this is on your first metacarpal to carpal. So it's the only one you're going to find that on. And then finally you have pivot. So the radius forms a pivot joint for supination and pronation. Your head is a pivot joint. That's how you shake your head no. Okay. So we'll see examples of these as we go through. This is a chart I pulled from another book. You absolutely do not need to memorize this chart at all. It just goes through all the different joints and classifies them for you. So it tells you what bones are involved, what is the structural type, and then what type of movement is involved. This is really just to clarify certain joints for you. Here's the upper limb. So if you're looking at it and you're thinking, well, I wonder what's going on with this one, then this is here to help you out, but you do not need to memorize this chart under any circumstances. Okay. So now we're going to get into movements. The best thing I can tell you here is get up and do these movements. When you are trying to learn how joints move, which is then going to be important for you learning the actions of muscles in lab, you got to just do them, okay? So first you want to make sure that you remember to start in correct anatomical position. And it's important to know that in correct anatomical position, pretty much everything, all of the joints in your body are in the extended position. So your neck is in extension. Your shoulders are in extension. Your trunk is extended. Your elbows, wrists, and phalanges are extended. Your hips are in the extended position, and so are your knees. So that's where you're starting, okay? So then flexion of the elbow or the shoulder is going to move the arm away from that correct anatomical position. Some joints, like the shoulder, the wrist, and the trunk, can be comfortably, along with your head actually too, you could hyperextend your neck. They can be hyperextended, so they can go past the 180-degree angle, okay? So wrists, knees, flexion of your trunk. This is a lateral flexion, Okay, so get up and do all of these. Go from flexion back to extension. If you can hyperextend, hyperextend. And then go back into correct anatomical position, knowing that pretty much that covers extension. Okay, so go through all of those. Abduction and adduction. I tend to say these abduction and adduction so that you can hear the difference between them. Because when you say them, abduction and adduction, they sound really, really similar. So abduction and adduction makes it a little bit clearer for you. So here, we're working off the midline. If you go away, again, start in correct anatomical position. If you go away from the midline, you are abducting. If you come back down towards the midline, you are adducting. Okay, so you can abduct your leg, pull it out from the midline, or you can adduct it and bring it back down to the midline. So you can go back and forth between these and just go through it and do it so you get the feel of what abduction feels like and what adduction feels like. Circumduction is something that can only happen in your ball and socket joints, and it is a combination of flexion, extension, abduction, and adduction. Essentially, from your point of contact in either your shoulder or your hip, you make a circle at the distal end. And in order to do that, you have to, you're starting an extension. So if your circle starts backwards in your arm, you're going to hyperextend, and then you're going to abduct, and then you're going to come back into extension, and then you're going to flex, and then you're going to adduct, and then you're going to be back into extension. So you're going to go through that circular motion. So it's really just a combination of those four others. Elevation and depression can happen with your shoulders. So you elevate them up or fully push them and depress them back down. Also happens in the mandible. Protraction and retraction can also happen in both the shoulders and the mandible. So protraction, you're pushing out. Retraction, you're pulling back. Rotation, you can laterally and medially rotate your limbs. So when we get into the shoulder, we'll find a bunch of lateral rotators and medial rotators that make up the rotator cuff muscles. And then you'll find muscles down in the thigh and the hip region that are going to deal with rotating the leg. You can also rotate your head, obviously. This is how you say no. Okay. Supination and pronation is specific to the positioning of the hand. So in correct anatomical position, palm is up, you are supinated. So supinated has the word up in it. So palm up is supinated. So in this position, the radius and ulna are running parallel to each other. When you go to pronation, the radius is going to, so it was over here, it's going to radiate over the top of the ulna. So the ulna is now here and the radius is here, so they are now making an X. This is the pronation. So supination is palm up, bones are parallel. Pronation is palm facing posteriorly, and the bones are in an X. The mandible basically uses protraction, retraction, elevation, depression, and then lateral and medial excursion for chewing. Okay. So when you think about the different movements that are needed to chew up a carrot or grind up a steak or something like that, you will use all of these different movements, generally not by themselves, but in kind of concert with each other to create chewing. The hand has a few different things going on with it. So you've got radial flexion, where you kind of flex toward the thumb, ulnar flexion toward the pinky, ab or abduction of the fingers, you spread them out. Adduction would obviously be coming back in, so they would look more like this. And then you've got your abduction of your thumb and opposition of your thumb. So this is where you get your opposable thumb, the fact that you can touch your thumb to all of your other fingers. The foot also has some, so your zero position, as if your foot is perfectly just sort of hanging at the end of your leg. If you pull your toes toward the anterior surface of your leg, this is called dorsiflexion. If you point your toes downward, it's called plantar flexion. If you tend to walk and wear the soles of your shoes out on the outside edges, it's because you bear more weight on the outside edges and you walk in an inverted fashion. If you tend to wear out the soles on the inside edges, you're bearing more weight here, and that's called an everted stance. Generally, if these are bad, we need to correct them because it creates a lot of issues in the ankle joint.